Welcome to an hour of HealthMade Radio. HealthMade is a community for natural health seekers where we educate people about common health conditions and share extensive research on the most effective natural health treatments and promote legislation that protects our health freedoms. The core concept belief is in the innate intelligence and healing power of the body, and if properly supported spiritually, emotionally, and nutritionally, it can find its way back to health. HealthMade Radio will bring information from integrative health experts throughout the world. Check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt, and I'll be your host. Today's guest is Jae Lee. And Jae Lee is CEO and the co-founder of Prenuvia, which promotes ionic calcium therapy using anti-orbital calcium. It was featured in the Truth About Cancer Project Asia version and presented in many medical conferences all around the world. Jay, I'm so excited to talk about this new therapy that is groundbreaking. I mean, it's really fascinating. So I'm really excited to chat about this.
Indeed. Thank you, Dr. Michael, for inviting me. And I'm really excited to talk about ionic calcium therapy. Well, let's get started.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about calcium. I mean, everyone feels, a lot of people dealing with osteoporosis, osteopenia, and we all know we're supposed to have lots of calcium. So people are taking calcium pills all over the place. And what impact does all of that calcium have in the body?
Well, I think that's a good place to start, Dr. Michael, because we do know calcium is a very important mineral in our body, most abundant mineral, of course. And calcium plays very important roles, actually multiple roles. And most of us think that calcium is just for strong bone and teeth, but calcium plays an important role in regulating stem cells. Our muscle and heart cannot contract properly without the proper level of calcium. Calcium also works as a neurotransmitter. That's what's happening in your brain. All the signals, that's a role of calcium. And it also plays a role as a second messenger. Hormone secretion heavily depends on precise amount of calcium. Enzyme activation and how our immune system works. To work it properly, we need to also have a good amount of calcium. And all the cellular functions, there are tons of cellular functions that has to be executed trillions of times. And that's heavily depend on the precise level of calcium. But the interesting thing is that, we're talking about ionic form of calcium, right? So not all the calcium works the same. There's only one physiologically active form of calcium, and that's an ionic form. And that's the thing that I like to talk about today.
So how common, so we have all these people taking calcium pills, like I stated. So how common is calcium deficiency? What is that something that, because people are taking so many calcium supplements that they are mostly okay in that area, or are they still deficient? And are we deficient even as a child, just right after birth?
Yeah, I think a calcium deficiency has to be looked at differently from the deficiency of other minerals and nutrients, because let's say if you're vitamin C deficient and you take vitamin C pills and your deficiency is resolved. Vitamin D, vitamin K, iron, iodine, doesn't matter, right? Whatever you're lacking, you put some good supplements and you're taken care. The thing about calcium is very different, because you may see your bone, and as we age, we may get osteopenia and osteoporosis, and we get weaker bones. And by taking these calcium supplements, we know that it's not really going to the bone automatically. And most often what happens is that this calcium ends up in the wrong places in our body, causing heavy calcification. So it is not just putting calcium in our system that could resolve calcium deficiency, but there has to be other steps taken, without which we actually end up putting calcium in the wrong places. And body-wide calcification is blamed to be the root cause of most of the degenerative diseases that we're familiar with. That's why calcium is different. You can't just simply take care of deficiency by putting calcium in our system.
So what you're saying then is you can actually then harm the body by taking calcium supplement, because if you're not able to move that calcium to the appropriate location, it will then be deposited into areas, like arteries and other tissues that can then be harmful.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I can give one illustration. I think the good one could be astronauts. For about 6 months stay in the space station, they come down with average 14, sometimes up to 30% bone loss. Not because the diet is lacking calcium. They're getting plenty of calcium in their system. But the thing is that calcium is going in as potent calcium. In fact, all the calcium that you take, doesn't matter what kind of supplement you're taking, or even from food, whether you're taking there's a lot of kale and spinach, dark green leafy vegetables, and you're getting there plenty of calcium in your system. But then, like astronauts in space, if you're not active, in space there is microgravity. So the bone is not stressed. That means that the astronauts are not able to utilize the protein calcium well, but our body needs ionic calcium, because ionic calcium is the only physiologically active form of calcium. So if you cannot really convert the protein calcium you're getting from diet or supplement into ionic calcium, then our body has to break down our bones to get the needed ionic calcium. That's why calcium deficiency is hard to resolve, because all the calcium that you're putting in actually goes in protein form, which is more like standby calcium, right? If we can utilize it well, it's good for us. But as we age, we lack the capacity to utilize it well. That's why we tend to break down our bone to get the needed ionic form of calcium. So actually, our body is ionic calcium deficient. But then we are putting protein calcium in our body. So if you cannot really convert the protein calcium to ionic form, then we're not really meeting ionic calcium deficiency. That causes our body to break down our bones to get the needed ionic calcium. The problem is, as we age, we take out more ionic calcium from our bones than we put back in. That's why we continue to lose our bone mass from age about 35 and 40 on, especially more for the woman who has all the hormonal decline after menopause. So that's the problem with the calcium. Very hard to address the deficiency issue.
And I would assume also, as we get older, I mean, you're saying that it's harder and harder as we get older, but I would assume it relates to that the ability to digest and absorb calcium, and then also a lot of elderly, they're put on these acid blocker medication, which makes it even harder to then be able to benefit from the calcium in your food. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, that's correct, because the stomach acid strength declines with aging, and calcium actually needs very strong stomach acid to process it. It has to digest it. And then it goes down to small intestine, and with the help of peptides and vitamin D, it comes into our body as protein calcium. So yes, it is true that as we age, we have absorption issue. But then I think the greater problem is utilization of that calcium. You can still get that protein calcium in our system, but then what good is it if you cannot utilize it? And that happens because of course, more sedentary lifestyle as we grow older. But also what happens is we experience the decline of growth hormone and also the sex hormone, and also a production of calmodulin, like the calcium transporter. These things are happening, so we can't really utilize the calcium that well. So just putting calcium in our system is not the solution. And not done properly, then we could actually further the calcification. And that could be the main cause of a lot of degenerative diseases.
Yeah, I agree. And that we all live under the illusion just because we put it in our mouth that somehow it's magically going to appear in the right places, but not recognizing that there are a huge amount of steps that are needed to be taken within the body in order to be able to guide that nutrient to the appropriate location, and also to alter it in a form that is usable. And that obviously that is what we're dealing with calcium, and just taking calcium pills is not going to solve it. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Jae Lee. He is the CEO and co-founder of Prenuvia. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Jae Lee. He is the CEO and co-founder of Prenuvia, and we're talking about the importance of ionic calcium therapy and how that is different from normal calcium that we take through our food, and then also through supplements, and how important it is to get the correct form. So we're talking about the bones, and almost sounded to me like the bones are a reserve of this ionic calcium, and if we are not getting it appropriately, through our food and also through, by putting stress on our body, then we are pulling from this reserve, and then we are depleting our bones, causing then osteoporosis and osteopenia.
Yes, that's true. That's very true. I think it's really important for us to know that the calcium that we take out from our bone, of course, we have to take it out if we can't get it from protein calcium. We have to break down our bones to get needed ionic calcium, because the proper ionic calcium level is needed and has to be regulated 24/7 in real time, because it has a very unique function in cellular level. Our cells are communicating what's called ionic calcium signaling, sometimes called ionic calcium wave. How we heard AM radio and FM radio, how AM radio uses amplitude modulation to carry the signal and frequency modulation to carry the signal. Our cells are so complex in creating this calcium signaling that uses both AM and FM to control many cellular processes. Right? That's one of the reasons why body has to maintain very precise level of ionic calcium, and therefore calcium goes in and out of our bones. Right? Sometimes when we have access, it goes back to the bone. If we're lacking, then we have to bring out from the bone to maintain precise level of ionic calcium. No other mineral in our body, no other nutrient in our body is as precisely controlled as ionic calcium because of its role in communication. Right? The problem is that as we age, we take out more calcium from our bones, and then it starts to calcify our body. Right? So all the calcium that we could not utilize in the form of protein calcium, plus all the calcium that we're taking out from our bones because we think we don't have enough calcium, all of that contributes to what's called cellular calcification. Now, we heard about vascular calcification, organ calcification, soft tissue of bone spurs and joint calcification. All of that is bad enough as it is. But then what's most dangerous is what's happening in cellular level. Because when calcium gets accumulated in cellular level, especially there are two reservoirs inside our cells. And one is mitochondria, and the other one is endoplasmic reticulum. And the calcium stored in these two reservoirs plays a very important role in creating very precise ionic calcium signaling that instructs our cells what to do. Now, if that gets messed up because of calcification happening at cellular level, then our cells are instructed to do the wrong things. Not only that, mitochondria dysfunction happens. Mitochondria is a powerhouse in our cells. That's where all the energy of life comes from. That mitochondria, it's broken down, and instead it actually creates a lot of free radicals that damages its own DNA and RNA and proteins, and essentially kind of causing our cells go through the mutation that leads to cancer and aging. Right? That's why calcium is not just bone and teeth, but it because of its role in signaling and communication, our body maintains a very precise level and regulates that. But all of that, however, gets dysfunctional as we grow older when we get cellular calcification. I think that's something that we really need to focus on.
Yeah, because the cells obviously, that's a building block of everything. And when they become dysfunctional, so it's just like if you have a house, it's built by brick, and the bricks start to deteriorate, that's going to impact the structure of the house. And if enough bricks are deteriorating, then all of a sudden, the house is not viable anymore. And it's the same with our bodies. If we become dysfunctional on the cellular level, then that's when disease then starts to take place. And depending on what type of cells that become dysfunctional, that will then drive what kind of disease. And you're mentioning then cancer, for instance, and we know that is, you have genetic mutations that takes place with cancer. And then also you're dealing then with mitochondrial dysfunction, because we know that cancer is a metabolic disorder where the cell is not able to produce the appropriate amount of energy, so it shifts over to alternate pathways, which then drives the cancer process even further. So, and what I'm understanding is that it almost sounds like cancer is a ionic calcium deficiency.
That's correct. You're right on. Actually, some doctors did define cancer as tailor-made adaptation to ionic calcium deficient environment. When we start to get the calcification at cellular level and it disrupts calcium signaling, and so cells cannot really communicate properly, the first thing that goes out the window is a cell's ability to repair itself. Right? So if cell cannot repair itself, then the damage do get accumulated, and then that becomes cancer. So it's very important that we maintain the proper ionic calcium level extracellularly and intracellularly, so that the signals that's happening inside a cell never gets distorted. I have an interesting quote from Dr. Thomas Levy in his book, Death by Calcium. I think the title of the book says it all, right? He says, all chronic degenerative diseases feature increased extracellular and intracellular levels of calcium. And he's talking about actually calcium ion, right? The increased intracellular calcium leads to increased oxidative stress, and that's what's damaging our cells. And he says chronic loss of calcium from our bones is what continually feeds the excess presence of calcium in the body. So calcium that we're losing from our bones. So we shouldn't just look at osteoporosis as a fracture risk. But once you see that your bone is emptying out, right, you should correlate to calcification already happened in cellular level. And we should actually worry about mitochondrial function, increased oxidative stress, and miscommunication that's happening in our cells that makes us vulnerable to all kinds of diseases, including cancer. And have you wondered why, as we age, suddenly we become vulnerable to so many diseases all at once, right? And there has been many studies that come out correlating bone health to our overall health. For instance, if you have a low bone density, then you are twice likely to develop Alzheimer's disease. There was actually a study done in Denmark, over 35,000 people. This was a long-term follow-up study that reported how if you have strong bones when you're in your 50s, then you actually live 11.6 years longer. These studies are really speaking volumes about how bone health is related to overall health, all because when you lose bone, when you're losing calcium from bone, it gets deposited in cellular level, right? It disrupts the communication. It makes your cells weak and cannot repair itself, and you become vulnerable to the diseases.
And with that, you're talking about the mitochondrial dysfunction that's caused by the cellular calcification. And then also, but then we have things like inflammation. Cellular inflammation. We got oxidative stress, and then you're talking about the signaling, how cells communicate, which obviously is crucial. If there's a lack of communication, then, I mean, we just know, I mean, if we would take away the cell phones of everybody, we know the world would go down, you know. So that's kind of what happens in the body. If you shut down the signaling, the calcium signaling, then everything just shuts down.
That's right. That's right. You know, communication is everything. And if you can see the role of ionic calcium that plays in regulating so many crucial processes of the cell, it's very important that the ionic calcium signal and the bandwidth in which it operates is preserved. Have you wondered why we have 4 parathyroid glands? It's 4 of them, right? Talking about the accuracy and the speed, right? And along with a skeletal system and intestines and kidneys, all working in real time to regulate precise level of ionic calcium. No other nutrient, it's regulated this way. If you're magnesium deficient, well, your body could wait a little bit, right? Vitamin C deficient, your body can wait. But not like calcium. Calcium, our body has to break down our bone right away to get the needed ionic calcium. If you didn't have good meal, let's say in the breakfast, and then your calcium is dipping low, your body breaks down the bone to get the needed ionic calcium. And in lunchtime, you had a good meal, and then you're getting all the calcium in, and body could utilize it. Body will put some of them back to your bones, right? Calcium works in a very different way, and it's very important a role in communication has to be really stressed in regard to our health.
Right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Health Matter Radio. I'm here with Jae Lee, and we're talking about ionic calcium and how important that is for your health and for your life. And if you have appropriate amount, you live longer with less disease, and you can battle cancer better. And there are lots of other diseases that are directly associated with this ionic calcium deficiency. And remember, I didn't say calcium deficiency. I said ionic calcium deficiency. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Matter Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Jae Lee. He's the CEO and co-founder of Pronuvia, which promotes ionic calcium therapy using anti-orbital calcium. So we've been talking about how important ionic calcium is, and we've been talking about how difficult it is to supply it through supplements. You know, just taking supplement, calcium pills is not going to do it. And then also, as we get older, we have a much harder time to get it through our food due to changes in our digestive system and many other factors as well. So you are part of then I would say a movement that is bringing this to the world, and this ionic calcium, and you're using then something called anti-orbital calcium. So how is that different than regular calcium?
Yes, anti-orbital ionic calcium, which is abbreviated as AIC, so we call it AIC therapy, uses a very special form of calcium. I mean, it took about 10 years of research and development for our company to make this. Yes, it is man-made calcium. I mean, its structure molecular structure is very similar to regular calcium carbonate, but then between calcium and oxygen, it uses what's called anti-orbital bonding. And this anti-orbital bonding is chemical bonding where two atoms come together, but then they're in high energy level, and the atomic orbitals combine in ways that leads to predominantly destructive interference. So these atoms do not want to stay together. So the calcium is loosely held on to the carbonate, right? So the molecule has some electrical charge, polarity, and calcium can be easily knocked off. Right? So it has different chemical property as well as physical property. What happens when you take this mixed in water is that this is the only calcium that will just disintegrates into 3 components. And it's oxygen, carbon dioxide, and calcium ions. free calcium ions with nothing to combine with. So it is absorbed through stomach lining in ionic form through diffusion and osmotic pressure, right? Goes in ionic form. Now, how is this different from other calcium? All the other calcium, doesn't matter whether you're getting from food or from supplements, all has to be digested in very strong stomach acid, and it goes down to small intestine, and it combines with peptides and vitamin D to go in protein form. So all the calcium that we get, it's actually going into protein form, which is more like a standby form. If we can utilize it well, that's good. But as we age, we lose the capacity to utilize it well, and hence we lose our bone health, right? But what happens if calcium just goes in ionic form, right? So AIC can provide up to 5 to 8 milligrams of calcium going in ionic form. But if that happens, our body is very sensitive to the ionic calcium fluctuations in blood level. Our pituitary gland releases a thyroid stimulating hormone and causes the thyroid to release calcitonin. And that really churns out bone building process. This is a natural bone building process. So there's no side effects, right? And ionic calcium is already innate to our body. So our body knows how to handle ionic calcium changes. So by putting calcium in ionic form and kind of exploiting the sensitivity of our body to ionic calcium, we can actually trigger massive bone building. This is like the level that we're building bone when we are like kids, right? So when the bone is triggered to build and repair in that kind of the process, then what's going to happen is that not only it fully utilizes protein calcium that we couldn't utilize before, but it also take all the displaced calcium elsewhere in the body, we call calcification, and bring all the calcium and navigate them back to where it belongs, our bones. So whether it's joint calcification, bone calcification, soft tissue calcification, organ calcification, including even the cellular calcification, which is the most dangerous one, right? It takes all the excess calcium and bring it back to your bone, right? And in our clinical trials that's still ongoing, and also the animal trials, we have seen significant bone building that the world hasn't seen before. And that happens for whether you're 50s and 60s or 70s, we're able to rebuild the bone, right? And in that process, we have also seen how the calcification, all those calcium deposits and elsewhere are also dissolving and going back to your bone. So it's what kind of physiological process that ionic calcium trigger has been just it's a phenomenal. And that's what AIC calcium is. It's the world's first ionic calcium delivery system that can be used multiple times a day and for a prolonged period of time safely without any side effects that builds strong bone, decalcifies your body, restore 60 trillion of your cells. And in that way, we can actually fight back degenerative diseases as well, because you're pretty much getting rid of the very root cause of many degenerative diseases.
That's so exciting. So bringing this forth, I mean, so obviously, you're talking about processes, and I mean, have you seen then real physical changes, where people have got, I mean, their bones get better, and then all of a sudden they're also maybe their cancer get better as well, because we are getting rid of this cellular calcification and then turning on the mitochondria, reducing inflammation, and then other activity, and then improving the signaling, which I would assume then would also include the signaling of if it's a bad cell that needs to die, which a cancer cell is, that is then able to die. I mean, so have you seen good changes with patients taking this?
Oh, yes. I mean, AIC therapy is used by many doctors around the world. And and they've been just reporting to us the amazing recoveries that they're experiencing with their patients. I could, let's say for Alzheimer's disease, which is one research, it says here, I can just quote, it says, collectively, the available data show that perturbed cellular calcium homeostasis plays a prominent role in the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease. For instance, before the medical world tries to kind of prevent the buildup of these amyloid and tau proteins that cause Alzheimer's disease, but then they went further to find out that what is causing our brain cells to produce these proteins in the first place, and found out that it is calcium signals that are not communicating properly because of the calcification that happen in brain cells, right? So what happens then if you remove that calcification from brain cells, right, which we have experienced in many of the patients? We had a patient who had a dementia for many years and couldn't start to remember the family members again. And this was one of the doctor's mother. And then, after a presentation, he actually came up on the stage and told all the doctors who were present there that, I have something to share. And this is a story that he shared. And also, AIC therapy was given to the Alzheimer's patients in the early stage. And then we have seen how the early symptoms of Alzheimer, it's kind of stopped, right? And so we had also Parkinson's patients who had tremors that was going away, stuff like that, right? It's all happening because the new researches show how the neurodegenerative diseases do happen because of disturbed calcium signaling. And you can find these papers actually on Parkinson's and ALS and multiple sclerosis and all these things. It seems like for past 2 decades, the focus was on really discovering the role of ionic calcium signaling and the world is discovering how the dysfunctioning calcium signaling is one of the major cause of these degenerative diseases. So, Dr. Michael, you have asked about how it is good for cancer, right? We know that cancer is very difficult disease to treat, but we do know that cancer have certain hallmark features, including acidity, right? And there's really nothing out there that actually can neutralize the acidity of cancer better than ionic calcium. There has been multiple studies done, and they found out that calcium can actually neutralize the lactic acid, right, which is one of the metabolite of cancer. Cancer secretes lactic acid for, survival as well as, the metastasis, and creating the microenvironment that's favorable for cancer to grow and to grow the vessels, right? The angiogenesis happens to feed cancer cells. But all of that can be defeated by making the microtumor environment back to the original pH of maybe 7.4, where the lactic acid can be neutralized by ionic calcium. And essentially, it stops angiogenesis. Not only that, studies have shown how cancer survives by secreting lactic acid and making the pH low around a tumor area because it turns off the immune response. When the pH reaches about 6 to 6.5, slightly acidic, then essentially all the immune effectors are downregulated. It's like a cancer putting on invisible cloak. But what happens if you take that cloak away by neutralizing lactic acid? Our immune system gets turned back on. It gets supercharged by ionic calcium, and now our immune system can see the cancer and attack. Okay, so that's one way how ionic calcium can be very good in fighting cancer. Another way is there has been so many studies done on what's called P53 gene. Now, P53 gene is called the guardian of cell because this is a gene that kind of monitors the cell health, and if the cell is repairable, then it fixes it, and if it's not, then it commits what's called apoptosis, which is cell death. It's programmed cell death, so that unhealthy cell can die off and be replaced by healthy cell, right? That's how the life cycle works. But the problem with most cancer cells is that this P53 function is compromised. So instead of committing suicide, cancer cells try to multiply and spread. Right? So P53 is probably the most studied gene in the history of cancer research, and they found out that somehow if we can flip the switch, kill switch back on, then cancer cells can commit suicide, right? Think about it, the radiation therapy, chemotherapy, and the targeted immune therapy, all of that is attacking cancer from outside. But what if we can turn this kill switch back on, right? But the thing is that many researchers done out there have shown how introducing ionic calcium can actually achieve that, right? I mean, not all cancer cells respond to this, yes, but then you're going to see a lot of researchers. For instance, one is that cancer cell makes a lot of NF-kappa B protein that interferes with the work of P53. But then by introducing ionic calcium, you break the dance between the two, you release P53 to resume its function. Right? So studies like that have shown that somehow if we can put and introduce ionic calcium into the cancer, then we have a chance to actually have these the rogue cells to commit suicide. That's another way the ionic calcium can really help cancer patients too, right? I think another way is, a third way is ionic calcium is also good in inhibiting COX-2 enzyme, which is an inflammatory enzyme, very strong inflammatory enzyme that fuels cancer growth, right? But then ionic calcium can pretty much inhibit these functions of COX-2 enzyme. Right? So in many different fronts, ionic calcium can be used together with other treatments to give better chance for cancer patients.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Jae Lee, and we're talking about the amazing things that can take place when you introduce the proper type of calcium into the body. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Health Made Radio. I'm Dr. Michael Karlfeldt. I'm here with Jae Lee. He's the CEO and co-founder of Prenuvia, and we're talking about AIC, which stands for Anti-Orbital Calcium. So you talked about all the different impacts that it had on cancer. I mean, I was meeting when I met you the other week, and I was chatting with Dr. Tony Jimenez, that runs Hope for Cancer, fantastic cancer clinic down in Mexico. He was mentioning that there was an elderly gentleman that dealing with brain cancer, and he was non-responsive, and they did intravenously introduce the product, the AIC, and next day he was fully functioning. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, yeah, we had some amazing stories. We had these last-stage cancer patients really feeling more comfortable, they are eating better, and have more energy, and cancer symptoms, rapidly disappearing. So, of course, Hope for Cancer uses a lot of other interventions as well. Just adding anti-orbital ionic calcium really helped these patients to really maintain quality of life and recover faster. Right? One that really stands out to me is when 80-year-old lady, she was actually the last-stage cancer patient. She had multiple myeloma, right? And I think the chemo failed, and the hospital kind of gave up on her. Her kidney was damaged down to GFR12, and she was looking into dialysis. So she came, and then she was under AIC, and as I was sharing all this data, her blood work over the period of about 1 year, a little over 1 year, kind of normalized. Later on, she's declared cancer-free. But then what's also amazing is her bone density. This is 80-year-old lady, cancer patient, multiple myeloma, right? Her T-score from minus 3.6, and that is severe osteoporosis. When we had measured her in about 2 years after, was minus 0.9. That's not even osteopenia. That's normal level, right? And what's also interesting is her GFR score, her kidney function that's damaged by kidney, regenerated again. And the GFR 2 years after was 62, which is normal for her age. So she does not need dialysis anymore. Right? So that's a kind of what amazing result that we reaped when I guess she was faithfully, following the doctor's order and taking the AIC. Many of her ailments, I think she had also thrombosis that got resolved. Her bone density is back to normal. Her kidney function is back to normal, and she's also declared cancer-free. So, quite amazing. This is one of the reasons why we're doing some multiple myeloma study together with a university in the United States, and we're expecting to have the result end of next year.
That's incredible, and it just proves the point that these different diseases, that it is due to foundational dysfunctions that are taking place. So it's not like it's a pharmaceutical drug deficiency, even though sometimes drugs are needed, but at the core of it, it is not due to that. And if we can then address the core dysfunctions, then no matter what disease it is, and here you've been talking about autoimmune conditions, you've been talking about neurological like Parkinson's, ALS, MS, you've been talking about bone loss, osteoporosis, osteopenia, and obviously cancer. We've been talking about that as well. But it just, to correct, the core functions, that things just, the body starts to function appropriately, and health just appears. It just becomes, which is so incredible. So Jae, we've really gone through the impact of calcification on the cells and all the different diseases that it causes, and it seems like it relates to things like autoimmune. We got cancer, obviously osteoporosis, osteopenia. But then also neurological conditions, we talked about that. So has this been possible? I mean, before your product came onto the market, before you brought Anti-Orbital Ionic calcium onto the market, have we been able to deal with these things?
Well, this is something that's been really highlighted in past 2 decades. Now we're seeing that cellular calcification does happen, and it's really detrimental once it happens. And there was really no way to reverse it because still our bone is empty, and our body experiences ionic calcium deficiency, and we're taking out more calcium from our bones that need it as we grow even older. And more calcification, it's happening. It's accelerated race. So maybe we could, by changing our lifestyle and changing our diet and all that, we can may slow it down. But there was really no way to reverse that. But through anti-orbital ionic calcium therapy, they were able to trigger physiological responses to build strong bone, strong enough to actually decalcify even from cellular level. So this is indeed a breakthrough. This is a new healing pathway only possible by putting ionic calcium in our body in a significant amount to be able to trigger these responses. Well, there has been some ionic calcium treatments, but only in emergency cases. When it was prescribed for arrhythmia or hypocalcemia. When you have a calcium channel blocker overdose, you go to ER, and then you'll be given some injection with calcium chloride. But then you can't do that repeatedly, multiple times a day because of really severe, serious side effects, right? So it was there, ionic calcium treatment. The theory was there, but then practically there was really no way to put ionic calcium safely in our system to trigger safe responses, and to being able to do this repeatedly over some period of time to bring about this kind of changes. So I'm really glad that our company were able to really offer a very safe means to put ionic calcium in our system and be able to trigger these responses that leads to healing. We're really kind of excited to find out how we're able to help so many patients right, with epilepsy, a lot of heart conditions, right, arrhythmia patients, and along with the kids with ADHD, and sometimes it works great, also helpful for autism spectrum disorder kids, and also kids with, the stunted growth can also reach their, full potential under AIC. We had patients with even the chromosome 8 syndrome. I mean, this is the DNA issue, but then somehow it works in epigenetics level to take care of all the symptoms, right? We're still in infant stage, and we're partnering with many institutions, and we are conducting clinical studies together. But then all the stories, encouraging stories we're hearing from the doctors and patients, this is what really gives me joy every day to be part of this business. And I love talking with doctors who are interested and provide this service and this treatment for the patients out there.
Yeah, it's really incredible. Yeah, I know stories of autistic children that after the therapy they become they're completely verbal, which is really incredible. Well, Jay, it's been such an honor to have you on the show, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and to bring this technology into the marketplace. I'm excited to be part of that and to offer that to my patients, and I know many doctors and institutions feel the same. And thank you so much, Jay, for taking time and explaining this to my audience.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. It was truly my honor and pleasure. Thank you for inviting me here.
Great. That is it for today. You're listening to HealthMade Radio. Remember, check us out at healthmade.co. Health is what you make it. 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 Is what you make it.